The royal family and senior politicians, including former prime ministers, have been attending a Thanksgiving service to mark 80 years since VE Day, the end of the Second World War in Europe. We can go live now to Westminster Abbey in London, where that event has been taking place, and join my colleague Christian Fraser. And Christian, I think it's always amazing to see the attention to detail that goes into putting together a special event like this and creating moments of such significance. Quite a sight to behold.
Absolutely, you've put your finger right on it, Anita. All the way through the day, we have seen echoes of the past. We've heard hymns that were played in the Abbey 80 years ago, even to a detail whereby the MPs and the Lords crossed Parliament Square today, filed past St Margaret's Church, where Winston Churchill went in 1945, just before he announced the end of war in Europe, and through the great west doors of the Abbey behind me, where you will see, in fact, that the congregation is still just drifting out, having seen and witnessed a quite extraordinary 80th commemoration. It began at midday with the tolling of Big Ben and the King leading the nation in the minute of silence, 2 minutes of silence. And shortly after the 2 minutes of silence, the King laid a wreath at the memorial for the unknown warrior. And then we had an extraordinary moment where we heard the words of Winston Churchill in the Abbey, that speech that he read out at 3 p.m. on May the 8th, followed by his great-great-grandson, Alexander, 10 years old, lighting the candle of peace. And at the end of the service, the King making his way down the nave, shaking the hands and greeting and thanking 78 members of the congregation, veterans who'd served and had lived through the Second World War, obviously taking his time, as much time as he could, to speak and to thank each and every one of them. With me is Lieutenant Morris, who serves in the Royal Navy. He was in the Abbey. He flies the new Lightning, which was part of the fly past over Buckingham Palace on Monday. And I believe, actually, that you once flew in a fly past yourself for the King's birthday.
That's right, yeah, last year. Yeah, the Texan T1 training aircraft that I was instructing on.
So you're still in training. We'll talk about that in a second, but I do want to talk about your grandparents, because they must have been very much in your mind this afternoon as you sat in the Abbey. Let's start with Roger Morris, your paternal grandfather, who served on HMS Rodney, which was a key part of the assault on Normandy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he commissioned in 1944 at the age of 18, straight onto the battleship. And D-Day was almost the first operation that he was involved in. He watched the bombardment of Sword Beach, among others, through binoculars from the observation platforms and one of the 6-inch guns there, and images that stay with him for the rest of his life, certainly.
So young, 18 years old. And as we've been saying through the day, although they announced victory in Europe on May 8th, that didn't mean the end of the war for serving people like your grandfather. In fact, he was part of the Arctic convoys that then went off towards Murmansk and Archangel to restock the Russians.
That's exactly right, yes. Yeah, he'd retell stories as well of those times when he was on HMS Scorpion, and he couldn't fit through the hatch up to the bridge to be able to navigate the ship because he was wearing so much clothing to try and keep warm. He had to try and strip down to his t-shirt and shorts, and then put all his warmers on afterwards.
And your grandmother also served. I mean, she was at Admiralty House.
That's right.
What did she do there?
Yes, so she was a plotter in the Women's Royal Naval Service, a Wren. She was leading Wren Ruth Spence, and she was involved in the coastal defence of the UK, anti-U-boat operations, and D-Day as well.
So you're on day release today from your training to come to the Abbey. It must have been very special.
It was very special, yeah, absolutely. Personally, with my grandparents as well, and professionally, representing 207 Squadron RAF, who lost 955 personnel during the war, flying Manchesters and Lancasters as well. So personally and professionally, it's very poignant.
And which part of it particularly stood out to you?
I think the Archbishop's address, which related the reading the Prime Minister gave, was really poignant. The Blessed of the Peacemakers is always something that stands out.
Yeah, there was a line in that which I pulled out for our viewers, where he said that the good in the world is under threat again, putting it in the context of course, the war that is being fought in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine. And that's very much part of your world. The commitment he called for from the Abbey is easy to make in principle, but very much more difficult to deliver in practice.
Well, yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're the Royal Navy and the RAF currently, and the Army involved in operations around the world at the moment. But mostly the Navy and the RAF in Op High Mast, which is a multinational exercise being led by the flagship of the Royal Navy, HMS Prince of Wales, and is ready to react whenever we need to.
And so when you finish your training, you will deploy to the 2 new aircraft carriers on the Lightning, HMS Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales.
That's right, yeah, we're very much looking forward to that as well.
Well, we wish you the best of luck with that. Thank you very much indeed for coming, and thank you for giving us your thoughts on the commemoration here at Westminster Abbey. We didn't actually see the King leave this afternoon. I think he went out through one of the side doors, but like his mother through her long reign, he spent a long time speaking to the veterans here this afternoon. You're watching BBC News. The bells continue to peal. They are continuing, I'm told they will continue to ring for about an hour and a half today, as they did at that announcement in 1945. It's quite the sound, which is why we've had to change our microphones here this afternoon. You can hardly hear yourself speak. But let's concentrate for a second on that arc between the past and the present that we saw in this service today. We saw a procession of various things that were supplied by the Imperial War Museum. So there was a helmet, there was also a map that I saw and a gas mask. Dr. James Bulgin, Head of Public History at the Imperial War Museum, is with me.
Hello.
I think you collated some of that, didn't you? Curated some of that, put it together. What did we see?
So we saw some items from our handling collection. So there's a gas mask, there was a box that the gas mask came in, an ARP helmet, just looking for objects that really kind of brought this huge event down to a personal level. The things that you might have seen during that period of time and would have been a really normal element of day-to-day life. You know, we're thinking with the helmets, we were thinking, how do you express the idea of a threat that is suddenly gone? And we thought, well, the helmet was something which you had to wear for years, and then suddenly one day stopped. And we thought that would make the point really well.
And that, just going back to 1945 and all the people that came here to the Abbey, was really the point, because quite literally they'd come out of the darkness. They'd come out of the blackout, which were represented by many of these objects sitting on the altar.
Exactly. When you think about the reality of what not just this city, but cities across this country experienced for that period of time, it's really almost impossible to conceive of. And so it's really important to find ways of kind of engaging with that. It's 6 years of not knowing what was going to happen the next day. And you know, we think about the Blitz as something that happened from 1940 to 41, but of course when the V1 and the V2 attacks happened, that's right towards the end. The last deaths from the V2 were weeks before the end of the war. So this threat was perennial, right to the end.
At the Imperial War Museum, you've been collating the letters that were sent home from the front, and there was one in particular from Lance Corporal Frederick Charles Burgess, which I have to confess actually did get me in the throat, because he's writing home to Kenneth, age 7, who was the eldest of 4 siblings.
Yeah.
And he's telling him that he's going to be home soon and that he's chasing Hitler in Europe, and he tells him all about Italy and what it's like in Italy, and he asks him to be good and to enjoy the Christmas period. But of course, Lance Corporal Burgess was killed. He died from his wounds that he sustained from a sniper's bullet. It's that sort of letter that reminds you of the sacrifice that many of these veterans who were here today made.
Absolutely. Funny enough, I was reading one myself earlier on, a chap called Bill Davies, who's writing to his wife saying, I imagine the baby's been born by now and I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, and he never got to meet the baby, so he died having had this child without even knowing what gender the child was. And that really does bring home the level of sacrifice and suffering that these people experienced and endured, ultimately for all of our freedom. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's true. When you think about exactly what was on the line in that conflict, it was a world-changing series of events.
What have you made of the 4 days of commemoration, which started with Alan Kennett, the 100-year-old Normandy veteran, at the Cenotaph, and finished here today with the 78 veterans that were invited? How do you think it's been remembered?
I think it's been a really important moment, actually. It's been really gratifying because, of course, the 75th anniversary wasn't everything it could have been because of COVID and the restrictions that have been placed on us. So it's been really important that the nation has had this opportunity to come together. And as you say, since Monday, this series of events where these people and their experiences have been kind of positioned front and centre, and it's given us all cause to kind of reflect on exactly what they went through and what that means for the contemporary world. As well, we see this everywhere. Like, we all live in the shadow of these series of events. It's changed all of our realities, and so to have the opportunity to get right back to the core of that thing and the people at the centre of it has been so critical, and there's been so much dignity in the way that it's been handled.
Dr. James Bolgan, good to see you again. Thank you very much for all your thoughts this week. I should just say that it doesn't end here. The events will go on around the country. They are ongoing at the Arboretum, the National Memorial Arboretum, and a concert tonight on Horse Guards Parade attended by the royal family.